The scream that tore from my throat wasn't from pain, it was from watching my son Michael walk away from me for what I knew would be the last time. His shoulders were rigid with determination as he signed the final papers, his expensive suit crisp and unwrinkled while my world crumbled around me like old concrete. "Dad, this is for the best," he said without turning around, his voice echoing in the sterile lobby of Sunset Manor. "You can't take care of yourself anymore." I gripped the arms of the wheelchair they'd forced me into, my hands shaking not just from the Parkinson's but from rage so pure it felt like swallowing fire. Behind him, my daughter Sarah adjusted her designer purse and checked her phone for the third time in 5 minutes. "Sarah," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Please. Don't do this to me." She finally looked up from her screen, and for a moment, just a moment, I saw the little girl who used to climb into my lap and beg for bedtime stories. Then her expression hardened back into the cold, calculating lawyer she'd become. "Daddy, we've been through this. You fell twice last month. You left the stove on. You can't remember to take your medications." She spoke to me like I was a child, each word carefully enunciated as if I were too stupid to understand. "This place has trained staff. They'll take good care of you, good care." The words tasted like ash in my mouth as I looked around at the beige walls, the industrial carpeting, the fake plants that would never need water or sunlight or love. An old woman in a wheelchair stared at nothing, drool running down her chin while a bored aide scrolled through her phone nearby. "I built Patterson Construction with these hands," I said, holding up my trembling fingers. "I worked 16-hour days so you could have everything you wanted. Piano lessons, dance classes, college tuition, down payments on your houses." My voice cracked. "This is how you repay me." Michael finally turned around, and his face was stone. "That's emotional manipulation, Dad. Dr. Richards warned us you'd try this." Dr. Richards. The psychiatrist they dragged me to after I'd gotten difficult about selling the house. The house where I'd raised them, where their mother had died in my arms, where every room held 43 years of memories. He'd spent 1 hour with me and declared me emotionally unstable and prone to irrational attachment to material possessions. "We'll visit," Sarah said, but she was already walking toward the exit. "Once you're settled in." Lies. I could see it in her eyes, hear it in the hollow way her voice echoed off the walls. They were washing their hands of me, filing me away like an old tax return they didn't need anymore. "Sarah, wait." I called out, desperation making my voice stronger than it had been in months. "I'm your father. I sang you to sleep when you had nightmares. I taught you how to ride a bike. I walked you down the aisle at your wedding." She paused at the door, her hand on the glass. For one impossible moment, I thought she might come back. Then she pushed through without looking back. "Mr. Patterson." A woman in scrubs appeared beside my wheelchair. Her name tag read, Jenny, certified nursing assistant. She had kind eyes, but they were tired. So tired. "Let me show you to your room." My room. As if this sterile box could ever be mine. The hallway stretched ahead like a tunnel to hell, lined with wheelchairs and walkers and the hollow-eyed residents who'd been forgotten by their own families. An old man reached out to grab my arm as we passed. "Have you seen my son?" he asked, his voice desperate. "He was supposed to visit yesterday. Or was it last month? I can't remember." "He'll come soon, Mr. Henderson," Jenny said automatically, the same lie she probably told him every day. My room was on the 3rd floor, overlooking the parking lot where Michael's BMW and Sarah's Mercedes were already pulling away. I watched until their taillights disappeared into traffic, taking with them any illusion I'd had left about unconditional love. "This is nice, isn't it?" Jenny said, trying to inject enthusiasm into her voice as she gestured around the cramped space. A hospital bed, a small dresser, a chair by the window, and a tiny bathroom with grab bars and a shower chair that screamed old and helpless. "You have your own TV, and there's a great view of the courtyard." The courtyard was a patch of dying grass surrounded by a chain-link fence. A metaphor for my new life if I'd ever seen one. "When do visiting hours end?" I asked. Jenny's smile faltered. "Visiting hours are from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m., but families can arrange special visits if needed." Special visits. As if seeing your father required an appointment now. That first night was the longest of my life. The bed was too narrow, the pillow too flat, and the sounds, God, the sounds. Crying from the room next door. Someone calling for their mother down the hall. The constant beeping of machines and the shuffle of nurses making their rounds. I stared at the ceiling and thought about the house I'd lost. the kitchen where my wife Martha had made Sunday dinners for 20 years. The workshop in the garage where I taught Michael how to use tools, back when he still looked up to me. The garden where Sarah had picked flowers for her mother's grave. All of it sold to pay for this place. This warehouse for the unwanted. The next morning brought my first real taste of institutional life. An aide I'd never seen before shook me awake at 6 a.m. "Time for your shower, Han," she said, already stripping the blankets off me. "I can shower myself," I protested. She laughed, not meanly, just tired. "Sure you can, Han, everyone says that the first week." The shower was humiliating. She stood there watching as I struggled with the soap, ready to catch me if I fell. I'd gone from being Franklin Patterson, successful businessman and respected member of the community, to being, Han, just another old body to be washed and dressed and fed. Breakfast was in the dining hall, a cavernous room filled with round tables and the overwhelming smell of industrial food and disinfectant. I was assigned to table 7 with 3 other residents, Mrs. Chen, who hadn't spoken since her stroke, Mr. Martinez, who kept calling me George no matter how many times I corrected him, and Dorothy, who was sharp as a tack but bitter as medicine. "You're new," Dorothy observed, picking at her scrambled eggs. "Let me guess, your kids put you here for your own good." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Mine too. 3 daughters, all of them too busy with their own lives to deal with Mom. Been here 18 months now. Know how many times they've visited?" She held up 3 fingers. "Christmas, Easter, and my birthday. 15 minutes each time, just long enough to ease their guilt." "They'll come around," I said, as much to convince myself as her. Dorothy snorted. "That's what we all tell ourselves, honey. But the truth is, once they put you here, you're dead to them. You become a burden, a reminder of what they'll be someday. Nobody wants to look at their own future in a wheelchair." Her words hit like physical blows, but I couldn't argue with them. Somewhere deep down, I'd always known this day would come. The signs had been there for months, the impatient sighs when I repeated myself, the way they'd exchange glances when I moved too slowly, the hushed phone conversations that stopped when I entered the room. The first week crawled by like a prison sentence. I learned the routines: medications at 8 a.m., 2 p.m., and 8 p.m. Meals at 7, 12, and 5. Activities in the rec room that nobody really wanted to do: bingo, crafts, sing-alongs to songs from 40 years ago. Physical therapy 3 times a week with a cheerful young man who called everyone buddy and acted like walking 10 feet was cause for celebration. The phone in my room became my obsession. I'd bought the premium package that included unlimited long-distance calls, thinking my children would want to check on me. The silence was deafening. On day 8, I finally broke down and called Michael. "Dad?" His voice was distracted, and I could hear traffic in the background. "Is everything okay? Are you hurt?" "No, I wanted to hear your voice." "How are the kids?" "They're fine, Dad. Look, I'm on my way to a meeting. Can I call you back later?" "Of course. I love you, son." "Yeah, okay. Talk to you later." He never called back. I tried Sarah next, but it went straight to voicemail. "You've reached Sarah Patterson Homes. I'm unable to take your call right now, but if you leave a detailed message, I'll get back to you as soon as possible." I hung up without leaving a message. What was the point? If she'd wanted to talk to me, she would have answered. The days began to blur together. Wake up, shower, breakfast, medications, activities, lunch, more activities, dinner, TV, sleep. Rinse and repeat. The staff was kind enough, but they had 30 residents to care for and no time for anything beyond the basics. I was fed, medicated, and kept clean, but I was dying inside. The worst part was watching the other residents slowly give up hope. There was Harold, who'd been waiting for his daughter to visit for 6 months. She lived 20 minutes away but was too busy with work. There was Agnes, whose son had promised to take her out for lunch next weekend for the past 3 months. There was Robert, whose grandchildren didn't even know he existed because his daughter was protecting them from seeing him like this. We were the forgotten ones, warehoused and medicated into compliance while our families got on with their lives. By the end of the 2nd week, I stopped calling. My children had made their choice, and I had to accept it. I was alone. The days stretched into weeks, and the weeks into months. I developed a routine that kept me sane: morning exercises in my room, reading in the library, what few books they had, and writing in a journal I'd bought from the gift shop. I wrote about my life, my regrets, and the growing anger that burned in my chest like acid. The anger surprised me. I'd always thought of myself as a reasonable man, but abandonment had a way of changing a person. Every sleepless night, every unanswered phone call, every holiday that passed without a visit, they all fed the fire inside me. Martha would have been ashamed of what I was becoming. She'd always been the one to smooth over family conflicts, to find the silver lining in every cloud. "They love you, Frank," she would have said. "They're just busy living their lives." But Martha was gone, and I was learning that love without presence was just a pretty word. 3 months in, I met another new resident, a woman named Eleanor who'd been a teacher for 40 years. Her son had put her in Sunset Manor after she'd been diagnosed with early-stage dementia. The cruel irony, she told me during one of our conversations in the courtyard, is that my mind is still mostly clear. Clear enough to understand exactly what's happening to me, clear enough to know that my own child sees me as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. Eleanor became my closest friend in that place. She was sharp, funny, and as angry as I was about the way society discarded its elderly. We'd sit together in the evenings, sharing stories about our old lives and raging against the indignity of our current situation. "You know what the worst part is?" she said one evening as we watched the sunset through our tiny window. "It's not the fear of dying. It's the fear of being forgotten while we're still alive." She was right. Death I could handle, it was natural, inevitable. But this slow erasure of our existence, this gradual fading from the lives of people we'd loved and sacrificed for, that was torture. On a rainy Tuesday in November, Eleanor didn't come to breakfast. I found out later that she'd had a stroke during the night. Her son arrived that afternoon, the first time I'd seen him, and spent exactly 30 minutes at her bedside before leaving to make arrangements. She died 2 days later, alone except for me holding her hand. Her son's eulogy at the funeral was beautiful. He talked about what a wonderful mother she'd been, how much she'd meant to him, how hard he tried to care for her in her final years. The whole congregation nodded sympathetically as he painted himself as the devoted son who'd done everything possible. I wanted to stand up and scream the truth, that he'd visited her exactly twice in 6 months, that she'd died heartbroken and forgotten, that his tears were guilt, not grief. But who would have believed the bitter old man in the wheelchair? That's when I realized something important: our children hadn't just abandoned us physically. They'd rewritten history to make themselves the heroes of our stories. In their minds, they were the long-suffering children dealing with difficult parents, not the selfish adults who'd warehoused their inconvenient elders. The revelation crystallized something inside me. If they wanted to play games, I could play too. The next week, I called my lawyer. Tom Bradley had been handling my affairs for 20 years. He'd drawn up my will when Martha died, helped me navigate the legal maze of her medical bills, and somehow managed to look genuinely surprised when I told him about my current situation. "Frank, I had no idea," he said, settling into the uncomfortable visitor's chair in my room. "Michael told me you'd moved to a senior community by choice." "Michael lied," I said simply. "But that's not why I called you here." I pulled out the journal I'd been keeping, 3 months of careful observations and growing fury distilled into actionable plans. "I want to make some changes to my will." Tom nodded, pulling out his legal pad. "What kind of changes?" "The kind that will teach my children the difference between love and greed." We spent 2 hours going over the details. Tom tried to talk me out of some of the more vindictive provisions, but I was determined. If my children saw me as nothing more than a future inheritance, then I'd give them exactly what they deserved. "Frank," Tom said as he packed up his papers, "are you sure about this? People do terrible things when money is involved. This could get ugly." "It already is ugly, Tom. I'm just evening the playing field." After he left, I sat by my window and watched the parking lot. Other families came and went, some dutiful, some distant, some falling apart in real time as they struggled with the reality of aging parents. But none of my blood relatives appeared. That night, I called both my children. Not to beg or plead, but to give them one final chance to be the people I'd raised them to be. "Hi, Dad," Michael said, and I could hear the resignation in his voice. "How are you feeling?" "I'm dying, son." Silence. Then, "What do the doctors say?" "The doctors say I could live another 10 years. But I'm dying anyway, a little bit every day, from loneliness and heartbreak." "Dad, please don't be dramatic. You're getting excellent care." "When was the last time you held your son?" I asked, cutting him off. "What? Your boy, Tommy. When was the last time you picked him up and held him just because you wanted to?" I don't know. Yesterday? This morning? What does that have to do with anything?" "Everything," I said. "It has everything to do with everything." I hung up before he could respond and immediately dialed Sarah. "Daddy?" Her voice was softer than Michael's, but still guarded. "What's wrong? I want to see my grandchildren." "Daddy, we've talked about this. Emma and Jake are at difficult ages, and seeing you in that place might upset them." "I'm not asking to see them in this place. I'm asking you to bring them somewhere else. A park, a restaurant, anywhere. I haven't seen them in over a year." "It's complicated, Daddy. James thinks." "I don't care what James thinks. I care what you think. I care whether my daughter loves me enough to let me hug my grandchildren one more time before I die." She was crying now. I could hear it in her voice. "You're not dying, Daddy. You're being taken care of." "I am dying, sweetheart. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but I'm dying. And when I'm gone, you're going to have to live with the choices you've made." I hung up on her too. Neither of them called back. That was 6 weeks ago. Since then, the silence from my family has been complete. No calls, no visits, no acknowledgement that I even exist. I've become a ghost haunting their guilty consciences, a problem they've solved by simply ignoring it. The staff here has noticed the change in me. I'm quieter now, more focused. I spend my days reading, writing, and planning. The rage has crystallized into something harder and colder: purpose. Other residents have family members who visit sporadically, bringing guilt gifts and staying just long enough to ease their consciences. I watch these awkward reunions from my spot by the window, studying the dynamics of families falling apart in slow motion. Mrs. Rodriguez's daughter comes every 2 weeks, stays exactly 1 hour, and spends most of that time on her phone. Mr. Kim's son visits monthly but always has somewhere else to be. Dorothy's daughters show up for holidays with forced smiles and leave the moment they can politely escape. They all follow the same pattern: minimal contact, maximum guilt relief, repeat as necessary. But not my children. They've chosen complete abandonment, which in some ways is more honest. At least I know where I stand. Yesterday, I overheard 2 aides talking in the hallway. "That's so sad about Mr. Patterson," one said. "What about him?" the other replied. "His kids never visit. Never call. It's like he doesn't have a family at all." "Some people just get forgotten," was the response. "Happens more than you'd think." Forgotten. The word followed me through the rest of the day, echoing in my head like a funeral bell. But they're wrong about one thing: I won't be forgotten. Not if I have anything to say about it. This morning, Tom called to confirm that all the legal documents have been filed and witnessed properly. Everything is in order. My children think they know what's coming to them when I die. They think they can warehouse me here and collect their inheritance when the time comes. They have no idea what I've really planned. I've spent months watching and listening, learning the patterns of this place. I know which aides gossip, which families are falling apart, which residents are planning their own forms of revenge. I've cultivated relationships, gathered information, and positioned myself for the moment when everything will come together. The beautiful thing about being forgotten is that people stop paying attention to what you're doing. They assume you're helpless, hopeless, broken. They don't realize that abandonment can forge steel from flesh, that betrayal can sharpen a mind like a blade. My children put me here to die quietly and conveniently. What they don't understand is that I've never been more alive, more focused, more dangerous than I am right now. The phone on my nightstand sits silent, but I'm no longer waiting for it to ring. I have other calls to make, other arrangements to finalize. The pieces are falling into place, and soon, very soon, Michael and Sarah are going to learn what happens when you abandon someone who has nothing left to lose. Tonight, as I sit by my window watching the empty parking lot, I smile for the first time in months. Not because I'm happy. Happiness is a luxury I can no longer afford. I smile because I know something my ungrateful children don't. The game isn't over yet. If this story is giving you chills, smash that like button. Subscribe and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any of our incredible stories. Share this with your family and friends. They need to see what happens next. The manila envelope in Tom Bradley's hands looked innocent enough, but I knew it contained enough dynamite to blow my children's world apart. 3 weeks had passed since Michael and Sarah died in that car crash, 3 weeks since Detective Lisa Morrison delivered the news that should have devastated me but instead left me feeling strangely empty. "Are you ready for this, Frank?" Tom asked, adjusting his tie nervously. "Once we walk into that conference room, there's no going back." I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror of Sunset Manor's administrative wing. The man staring back at me was thinner than he used to be, grayer, more fragile looking. But his eyes, my eyes, burned with a fire that had been building for 3 years of abandonment and betrayal. "I've been ready for this moment since the day they dumped me here," I said. The conference room was packed. Word of the will reading had spread through the family network like wildfire, drawing relatives I hadn't seen in years and some I barely recognized. They clustered around a long table like vultures around roadkill, their faces masks of false grief and barely contained greed. Linda Patterson, Michael's widow, sat at the head of the table wearing an expensive black dress and crocodile tears. She'd always been a social climber, marrying my son for his prospects rather than his personality. Now she clutched a tissue in one manicured hand while checking her phone with the other. Beside her sat James Holmes, Sarah's husband, a weak-chinned investment banker who'd never liked me because I could see right through his polished exterior to the calculating worm beneath. He wore his grief like an expensive suit, perfectly tailored for the occasion. My nephew Robert had driven down from Chicago with his wife Carol, both of them trying to look appropriately somber while their eyes gleamed with anticipation. Robert had always resented the fact that I'd built a successful business while he'd struggled as a middle manager at someone else's company. Sarah's business partner Marcus Webb lounged in his chair with the casual arrogance of a man who thought he was about to become very wealthy. He'd been whispering poison in my daughter's ear for years, convincing her that family obligations were holding back her career. The room buzzed with whispered conversations and speculation. How much was the old man worth? Who would get the construction company? What about the real estate investments? The life insurance payouts? None of them had attended Michael and Sarah's funerals. I knew because I'd watched the live stream from my room, counting faces and noting absences. But here they were now, drawn by the scent of money like sharks to blood in the water. Tom cleared his throat and the room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming. As you know, we're here for the reading of Franklin Patterson's last will and testament, dated March 15, 2025. The date was significant. It was exactly 1 week after what would have been Martha's 70th birthday, a day I'd spent alone in my room while my children forgot to call yet again. Before we begin, Tom continued, "I need to inform you that Mr. Patterson has requested to address you all personally." A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. Linda looked up from her phone with genuine shock. "Daddy Frank wants to speak." Daddy Frank. She'd never called me that when Michael was alive. Tom wheeled me to the head of the table, and I looked around at the faces of people who treated me like I was already dead. The silence stretched uncomfortably as I let them squirm. 3 years ago, I began, my voice stronger than it had been in months. My children decided I was too much trouble to care for. They signed papers, wrote checks, and shipped me off to this place like a piece of furniture they didn't want anymore. Linda started to protest. "Daddy Frank, that's not." "Shut up," I said quietly, and the venom in my voice made her recoil. "You don't get to talk. You get to listen." The room was dead silent now. For 3 years, I sat in that room upstairs waiting for visits that never came. Phone calls that were never returned. Grandchildren who forgot I existed because their parents decided I was an embarrassment. I looked directly at James. "Isn't that right, James? Didn't you tell Sarah that bringing Emma and Jake to see their grandfather might traumatize them?" James's face went pale. "Frank, I never said." "You said it to Dr. Richards during that family meeting you thought I didn't know about. The one where you all decided my fate without including me in the conversation." The admission hung in the air like a guilty secret exposed. "Because that's exactly what it was. You want to know what's traumatic?" I continued. "It's watching your own children walk away from you like you're already dead. It's lying awake at night wondering what you did wrong, how you failed so completely as a father that your own blood could discard you without a second thought." Linda was crying now, real tears this time, not the performance art she'd been putting on for the cameras. "But here's the beautiful thing about being forgotten," I said, my voice growing stronger. "People stop watching you. They assume you're helpless, broken, defeated. They don't realize that abandonment can forge steel from flesh." I nodded to Tom, who opened the envelope with shaking hands. "The last will and testament of Franklin James Patterson," he began, "executed on March 15, 2025, being of sound mind and body." The legal language rolled over them like waves, standard boilerplate that meant nothing. They weren't listening to the formalities. They were waiting for the names, the numbers, the division of spoils. "To my daughter-in-law Linda Patterson," Tom read, "who couldn't find time to bring my grandchildren to visit their grandfather even once in 3 years, who told Michael that caring for me was not her responsibility, and who suggested that my Parkinson's diagnosis was probably just attention-seeking, I leave the sum of $1. The words hit Linda like a physical blow. Her mouth fell open, and the tissue fluttered from her nerveless fingers. "What?" she whispered. "Furthermore," Tom continued remorselessly, "I leave an additional $1 to be split between my grandchildren Tommy and Jessica Patterson, with the stipulation that they use it to buy a card for Mother's Day, something their mother apparently forgot to teach them, since I never received one during my 3 years of imprisonment. Linda let out a wail of anguish that echoed off the conference room walls. This is impossible. Michael was his son. His only son. To my son-in-law James Holmes, Tom read without pause, who told my daughter that I was just trying to manipulate everyone when I asked to spend Christmas with the family, who suggested that my emotional outbursts were signs of dementia, and who advised Sarah to let the professionals handle the old man. I leave the sum of $1. James shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. This is insane. You can't do this. We'll contest it. Mental incompetence. Sit down, James, I said calmly. You'll want to hear the rest. Tom's voice never wavered as he continued the systematic destruction of their expectations. To Marcus Webb, my daughter's business partner, who convinced her that family obligations were holding back her career potential, who suggested that placing me in institutional care would free her up to focus on what really matters, and who advised her to limit contact with me to avoid emotional manipulation, I leave the sum of $1. Marcus's confident smirk evaporated. He'd been counting on inheriting Sarah's share of the construction company, had probably already started making plans for expanding the law firm's real estate division. To my nephew Robert Patterson and his wife Carol, Tom continued, who visited me exactly twice in 43 years, once for my wedding and once for Martha's funeral, but who called 6 times in the past month asking about family assets and estate planning. I leave the sum of $1 each. Robert's face had gone from pale to gray. Uncle Frank, we were planning to visit more often, but you were busy, I finished. Everyone was always busy. Too busy for an old man who'd outlived his usefulness. The litany continued, each name accompanied by a specific betrayal, each dollar a deliberate insult. Cousins who'd ignored me for decades but suddenly remembered we were family when money was involved. Family friends who disappeared the moment I became inconvenient. Even the pastor from my old church, who'd never once visited despite my 40 years of faithful attendance and generous donations. $1. $1. $1. Each pronouncement fell like a hammer blow, destroying dreams of easy money and exposing the ugly truth of their motivations. These people hadn't gathered to mourn Michael and Sarah. They'd come to divide the spoils. The remainder of my estate, Tom read, his voice cutting through the mounting hysteria in the room, including all real estate holdings, investment portfolios, business assets, life insurance proceeds, and personal property, with a total estimated value of $4.7 million. The room held its breath. Someone had to get the real money. These $1 bequests were just Frank Patterson's way of making a point before getting to the serious business of inheritance. I leave to Detective Lisa Morrison of the Metro Police Department. Silence. Complete, stunned silence. Then chaos erupted. Who the hell is Lisa Morrison? Linda shrieked, her careful composure finally cracking completely. That's impossible. James yelled, pounding his fist on the table. We'll sue. This is elder abuse. Undue influence. There has to be a mistake, Robert stammered. Lisa Morrison. I've never heard that name in my life. Tom raised his hand for silence, but the shouting continued. These people had spent the last 3 years treating me like I was already dead, and now they were learning that their meal ticket had just evaporated. If I may continue, Tom said loudly, the will includes a complete explanation of Mr. Patterson's decision. Gradually, the room quieted. They needed to understand what had happened, needed to find some angle for contesting this disaster. Detective Lisa Morrison, Tom read, is a decorated police officer with 15 years of exemplary service. She has received commendations for bravery, community service, and dedication to justice. She volunteers at a homeless shelter every weekend, coaches youth soccer in her spare time, and is raising 2 children as a single mother after her husband died in the line of duty. But who is she? Linda demanded. Why would Frank leave everything to a complete stranger? Tom looked at me, and I nodded. It was time for the final revelation. Detective Morrison is not a stranger, Tom said quietly. She is Mr. Patterson's granddaughter. You could have heard a pin drop. Every face in the room showed the same expression of shock and confusion. That's impossible, James said weakly. Michael and Sarah were his only children. 28 years ago, Tom continued, Michael Patterson got a girl pregnant during his senior year of high school. Her name was Nancy Morrison, and she was from what some people might call the wrong side of town. Linda's face went white as she realized what was coming. When Nancy told Michael about the pregnancy, he panicked and went to his father for advice. Frank Patterson, concerned about his family's reputation and his son's college prospects, gave Michael money to handle the situation. He assumed the girl would get an abortion and the problem would disappear. I watched Linda's world crumble as she learned that her perfect husband had a secret that had followed him to the grave. But Nancy Morrison was a strong young woman with principles. She took the money, moved to another state, and raised her daughter alone. She kept the Morrison name but told Lisa the truth about her father when she was old enough to understand. The room was dead silent except for Linda's quiet sobbing. Lisa grew up knowing she had a half-brother and half-sister, a grandfather who'd rejected her before she was born, and a father who'd chosen his reputation over his own child. But Nancy Morrison raised her daughter not to hate, but to understand that people sometimes make terrible decisions when they're afraid. I thought about Nancy Morrison, the brave girl I'd dismissed as a gold digger all those years ago. She'd raised a daughter who became everything my legitimate children weren't: honorable, selfless, dedicated to serving others. When Michael and Sarah died in that car accident, Tom continued, Detective Morrison volunteered to deliver the notification personally. She'd always wondered about her biological family but had never made contact out of respect for her mother's wishes. The pieces were falling into place now. I could see understanding dawning in their faces, along with the growing horror of what this meant for their financial futures. Detective Morrison visited Mr. Patterson 6 times after that initial meeting, Tom read. She told the staff she was following up on the case, but the truth was simpler: she wanted to know her grandfather, even if he never knew who she was. But I had known. The moment I saw her standing in that lobby, I'd recognized something familiar in her face. She had Martha's eyes, my mother's stubborn chin, and a strength that reminded me of what my family used to be before money and social status corrupted everything. During those visits, Tom continued, Detective Morrison never identified herself as Mr. Patterson's granddaughter. She simply sat with him, listened to his stories, and showed him the kind of compassion his own children had forgotten how to give. I remembered those visits now with perfect clarity. This young woman, this stranger who owed me nothing, had treated me with more kindness in 6 conversations than my own children had shown me in 3 years. Lisa Morrison embodies everything that Michael and Sarah should have been but never were, Tom read from my own words. She is living proof that blood alone doesn't make a family, and that sometimes the children we reject grow up to be better people than the ones we kept. Linda had stopped crying and was staring at me with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. You gave away our children's inheritance to punish us. No, I said quietly. I gave it to someone who deserved it. Someone who understands that family is about more than DNA and inheritance checks. This will be challenged, James said, but his voice lacked conviction. Mental incompetence, undue influence, fraud. Tom reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Good luck with that. Mr. Patterson underwent extensive psychological evaluation by 3 independent psychiatrists last month. Dr. Elizabeth Hendricks, Dr. Robert Martinez, and Dr. Susan Chen all certified that he is completely competent and of sound mind. He spread the documents across the table like a winning poker hand. Furthermore, all of Detective Morrison's visits were recorded by the facility's security cameras, at Mr. Patterson's request. At no time did she discuss inheritance, request money, or even identify herself as his granddaughter. In fact, she explicitly refused his offer to pay for her gas money when she had to drive across town for these visits. The folder contained months of careful preparation. Medical evaluations, security footage, witness statements from the nursing home staff, and most damning of all, recordings of Michael and Sarah's own words. Finally, Tom said, I have audio recordings of several conversations between Michael and Sarah Patterson discussing their father's estate. Would you like me to play them? The color drained from Linda's face. What recordings? Tom pulled out a small digital recorder. These were made during their visits to my office last month, when they were attempting to have their father declared mentally incompetent. He pressed play, and Michael's voice filled the room. The old man's losing it, Tom. He called me crying last week, begging me to visit. It's pathetic. We need to get control of his assets before he does something stupid with them. Then Sarah's voice, Daddy's always been manipulative, but the Parkinson's is making it worse. He's trying to guilt us into more visits by acting helpless. We can't let emotional manipulation override good financial planning. The recording continued for several more minutes, capturing my children's cold calculation as they discussed the best way to seize control of my assets while keeping me locked away in institutional care. We could squeeze more money out of his guilt if we play this right, Michael's voice said with casual cruelty. Maybe bring the kids for one visit, take some pictures for social media, then use that as leverage for him to update his will. Linda was sobbing again, but this time it wasn't from grief, it was from the shame of hearing her husband's true character exposed for everyone to hear. There are 6 hours of recordings, Tom said, stopping the playback. All of them documenting Michael and Sarah's plans to manipulate their father for financial gain while providing him with minimal care and attention. The room was dead silent except for Linda's muffled crying. Any judge who hears these recordings, Tom continued, along with the security footage showing 3 years of neglect and abandonment, will understand exactly why Mr. Patterson chose to leave his estate to someone who actually cared about him as a person rather than as a source of inheritance. I looked around the table at the faces of people who treated me like I was already dead. Some were angry, some were devastated, but all of them were finally seeing the consequences of their choices. "There's one more thing," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "Detective Morrison doesn't know about any of this yet." Tom nodded. Mr. Patterson insisted that Lisa Morrison not be informed about her inheritance until after the will reading. He wanted to ensure that her kindness was genuine, not motivated by financial expectations. It was true. Lisa had no idea that her grandfather had left her anything, let alone everything. Her visits, her compassion, her gentle presence during the worst period of my life, all of it had been freely given without expectation of reward. "She's waiting in the lobby," Tom said. Mr. Patterson wanted to tell her personally. I looked around the room one last time at the faces of my family, people who'd shared my blood but not my values, who'd taken my love for granted while treating me like a burden to be managed. "You all spent 3 years treating me like I was already dead," I said. "Well, congratulations. As far as my estate is concerned, you were right. I am dead to you, and you're dead to me." Linda made one last desperate attempt. "Daddy Frank, please. Think about Tommy and Jessica. They're your grandchildren. They love you, do they?" I asked. "When was the last time they called me? When was the last time they sent me a drawing, a card, a photo? When was the last time they even asked about me?" She had no answer because there wasn't one. My grandchildren had been taught to forget I existed, just like their parents had forgotten. "You stole 3 years of my life," I continued. 3 years I could have spent with people who actually cared about me. 3 years of birthdays, holidays, bedtime stories, and little league games that I'll never get back. You turned me into a ghost haunting the edges of my own family's life. I pushed back from the table, signaling that this farce was over. "Tom will handle any legal challenges you want to file, though I strongly advise against it. You'll lose, and you'll spend whatever money you do have on lawyer fees and court costs. Cut your losses and move on with your lives, hopefully with more grace than you've shown me." As Tom wheeled me toward the door, I heard Linda's voice behind me, "This isn't over, Frank. We'll fight this." I paused and looked back at her. "You already fought, Linda. You fought against kindness, against family loyalty, against basic human decency. And you lost." The last thing I saw before the door closed was the table full of people who'd gambled on my death and lost everything. If this story has you absolutely stunned, hit that like button right now. Subscribe and turn on notifications because you need to see what happens when Frank finally meets his granddaughter Lisa. Share this story with everyone you know. This is the kind of tale that changes how you think about family forever. The ending will absolutely blow your mind.